I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix.
The man you see here is Allen Ginsberg, arguably the most influential poet of the last century. His groundbreaking poem, Howl, written in 1955, was a call to the other outcast writers and artists scattered across America. It was the first real work of the Beat generation, the literary, cultural, and sexual revolution of the 1950s that included famous writers William S. Burroughs and Jack Kerouac. Howl venerated the revolutionaries of Ginsberg's era, from his fellow writer Kerouac to the jazz musicians in San Francisco. It forever changed the way poetry was viewed worldwide and sparked an artistic revolution. However, the references in Howl to drugs and homosexual sex earned its publisher, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, a date in court. Erwin Allen Ginsberg was born June 3, 1926, to the poet Louis Ginsberg and his wife Naomi. Naomi suffered from paranoid delusions and had suicidal tendencies. She was confined in mental hospitals for much of Ginsberg's youth. These early experiences inform the portrayal of insanity in Ginsberg's work. This brings us to the autobiographical nature of the poem Howl. Ginsberg wrote it in 1955, 5 years after having been discharged from the mental institution Columbia Psychiatric. Since then, Ginsberg had been in a number of failed love affairs and was sinking into depression. The craziness in his own life inspired him to chronicle the craziness around him, embodied by the infamous beatniks. On August 25, 1955, Allen Ginsberg sat at his typewriter on Montgomery Street in San Francisco and wrote half of what would become Howl, a poem in 4 parts. The first is the most famous, focusing on Ginsberg's experiences with the beat scene. Here is an excerpt of Ginsberg reading from the first section.
Who chain themselves to subways for the endless ride from Battery to Holy Bronx on Benzedrine until the noise of wheels and children brought them down shuddering, mouth-racked and battered, bleak of brain, all drained of brilliance in the drear light of zoo.
The second part relies on the repeated cry of Moloch, the Ammonite god associated with child sacrifice, used by Ginsberg to represent the evils of capitalism. The third part is based on his experiences at Columbia Psychiatric and the people he met there, characterized by the refrain, "I'm with you in Rockland," Rockland being a false name for Columbia Psychiatric. The fourth and last part is actually a footnote in which Ginsberg exalts the holiness of all things. The reason Ginsberg's poetry was revolutionary from an artistic standpoint was that he did not stick to the meter and format of accepted poetry. Howl is an experiment with a long strophe form, each line being measured by Ginsberg's breath. Literary critics of the time would hail it as the next step in the evolution of poetry. But first, Ginsberg would have to get Howl published. Ginsberg frequented many bookstores in the San Francisco area, but none so religiously as City Light's bookstore. The owner, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, published poetry and was interested in publishing Howl. Ferlinghetti suggested that Howl be published as part of a collection of Ginsberg's work. Ginsberg readily agreed. Soon after, Ginsberg was approached to read with a few other poets at the Sixth Gallery, a popular hipster hangout. He decided to read Howl. When Ginsberg arrived at the gallery, somewhat drunk, he was nervous and believed that no one would like his very personal work. Contrary to Ginsberg's predictions, his reading was met with thunderous applause. The next day, Ferlinghetti sent a telegram to Ginsberg. "I greet you at the beginning of a great career. When do I get a manuscript of Howl?" The San Francisco scene was abuzz. Howl signified the start of a new era. Ginsberg found himself caught up in a flurry of party invites from the literary elite. He approved the final draft of Howl and Other Poems to be published by Ferlinghetti. Ferlinghetti, while enthusiastic, was worried about the publishing of Howl, as current obscenity laws might threaten its distribution. He went ahead with the printing anyway, confident that the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, would defend the work in court if it came to that. The first shipment arrived without a hitch and was on shelves by November 1st, selling well enough to merit a second printing. Pleased, Ginsberg set off to visit friends in Morocco. Little did he know that by the end of the month, his poems would make the headlines. On March 27, 1957, Ferlinghetti wrote Ginsberg to inform him that the Collector of Customs had seized 520 copies of the second printing of Howl and Other Poems, calling the poem Howl particularly obscene and saying, "You wouldn't want your children to come across it." Soon after, though, the books were released and Ferlinghetti breathed a sigh of relief. But on the night of June 3rd, 2 plainclothes officers entered City Light's bookstore and purchased Howl and Other Poems. Soon later, they returned to arrest manager Shigeyoshi Murao. A warrant was issued for the arrest of Ferlinghetti, who turned himself in. The two were charged with selling lewd and indecent writings, though the charges against Murao were soon dropped, as there was no proof he was aware of the contents of Howl and Other Poems. The trial was scheduled for August 8th and was handled by the San Francisco Municipal Court. The defense was represented by lawyers provided by the ACLU. Ferlinghetti was worried by the random selection of Judge Clayton Horn, a very conservative, born-again Christian. Ferlinghetti pled not guilty to the charges of selling lewd and indecent writings. His case rested on his belief that the isolated words and sexual references shown by the prosecution were not obscene as used in the poem, and that the poem had social importance. As proof, Ferlinghetti brought 9 literary critics to the stand as witnesses, one proclaiming Howl as probably the most remarkable single poem published by a young man since the Second War. The prosecution denied the defense's claims, their witnesses variously stating, "The theme has a negative value, no value at all," and "You feel like you are going through the gutter when you have to read that stuff." On October 3, 1957, almost a month after the trial began, Judge Horn found Lawrence Ferlinghetti not guilty, surprising all. He stated, "The theme of Howl presents unorthodox and controversial ideas. Coarse and vulgar language is used in treatment, and sex acts are mentioned, but unless the book is entirely lacking in social importance, it cannot be held obscene." The defense was elated. A new printing of Howl and Other Poems was immediately ordered, and then another. The publicity from the trial had made Ginsberg a celebrity among the general public. When Ginsberg returned to the States in 1958, he was greeted like an American hero. Ginsberg's success had sparked an interest in the Beat generation from publishing companies. In the following years, Jack Kerouac's On the Road and William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch would finally find their publishers, and are today considered classics. Without Howl, the Beat generation may never have come to the attention of the general public, and its revolutionary contributions to the world's literature may never have had a widespread effect. Much of modern literature owes its roots to the experimental poetry and prose produced during the 1950s. Also, without Howl, obscenity laws would have barred the publication of many Beat novels. Howl was the first of a number of landmark obscenity cases that sparked a reform in censorship laws and reaffirmed the place of the First Amendment in American culture. Howell's trial directly led to the publishing of previously banned works like Lady Chatterley's Lover and cleared the way for the controversial novel Lolita. Ginsberg would go on to have a long and fulfilling career until his death on April 5, 1997, at the age of 70. During his lifetime, he had befriended the likes of Salvador Dali, Edith Sitwell, John Lennon, and Bob Dylan. He coined the term flower power, and has been called personally responsible for the hippie movement, which he claimed was the natural progression of Beat culture. Ginsberg became an advocate for free speech everywhere, participating in anti-war rallies and in one notable incident, talking the infamous motorcycle gang the Hells Angels out of attacking peaceful protesters. He was also a major proponent of gay and black rights, his views causing him to get kicked out of countries from Cuba to Czechoslovakia. Allen Ginsberg and his poem Howl redefined obscenity and sparked a revolution in artistic expression. His efforts in the realms of social and political activism inspired generations, and will continue to inspire many more. I argue that Howl and its subsequent trial is more relevant today than at any other time since its publication, as the government cracks down on free speech to greater and greater degrees. It is this continuing relevance, proven by the fact that Howl still sells over 20,000 copies each year, that cements Ginsberg's place as the most influential poet of the 20th century.
Holy forgiveness, mercy, charity, faith, holy, hours, bodies, suffering, magnanimity, holy the supernatural, extra intelligent, brilliant kindness of the soul.